Hello friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and I want to start today by thanking Birch Living for sponsoring today's video. This is going to be another video in the 2025 Every Bit Counts Challenge series. This is the preservation challenge that we do every August to preserve something every day of the month, no matter how small. And so we're going to do some fun soup bases in today's video. We're also going to make some hash browns and prepare them for storage in the freezer, as well as some other fun projects on the homestead. So harvests from the garden this time of year just kind of look like a hodgepodge of vegetables. And so I wanted to bring you in my first project this week, one of my favorite things to do when you have random veggies that maybe are an overflow from what you're using in meals and you want to get them in jars somehow. So I started by making a tomato sauce by simmering my tomatoes and running them through my mill. Then I'm going to grab some of the onions that you guys saw me putting into storage last week. I had saved the really small onions to use in my canning projects, and this is one of the projects in which we're going to use them. We're going to be using the guidelines for canning soup from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and they're actually very liberal in their guidelines. Since this is a vegetable soup and there's no meat in the jars, the processing time for quarts is going to be 75 minutes, and it's 75 minutes regardless of whatever vegetables we choose to put in these jars. So you have a lot of freedom to create your own recipe here for a vegetable soup. And that's why I love to do this with all those odds and ends that are just left over from the meals I'm cooking, using the things coming out of the garden. So this week I have onions and garlic. We have some Chinese red noodle beans and some okra, and then whatever we have, the space that we have left over in the jars, I'm just going to add some frozen mixed veggies. But you could use whatever you want. You know, if you have green beans in the garden, if you have carrots, you could add potatoes. You could even soak and cook some dried beans and add this to it. You could even do meat if you wanted to, and as long as it's not more than half of the jar full of meat, the processing time would be the same. So that's where I got my recipe from. I follow those guidelines from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and that's how I know that this is safe to kind of do whatever I want here with these vegetables. We're going to season these, and I'm putting in 1 teaspoon of salt per jar. Once again, use whatever seasonings you like in your vegetable soup. You're not going to affect the safety of this recipe. I decided to also add a teaspoon of parsley, and I also added a couple of bay leaves per jar. Here are those mixed vegetables that I mentioned. You just want to make sure that they're thawed and not frozen when you put them in your jars with the rest of your room temperature vegetables. And then by this point, my tomato sauce was done on the stove simmering, and I'm going to get ready to start filling the jars the rest of the way. Now I'm doing a tomato-based soup. You could use beef broth, vegetable broth, chicken broth, any kind of liquid that you want in your soup here. Just make sure that you debubble those jars because you can see how the headspace changes when you do that, and then go back in and top them off, leaving 1-inch headspace. From here, we're going to make sure that the rims of our jars are clean so that we ensure a good seal, and then we're going to put the lids on those rims, add our rings, and then as I mentioned, these are going to process in the pressure canner for 75 minutes because they're quarts. If you chose to do pints of vegetable soup using the same type of recipe, those would process for 60 minutes. So I wanted to show you something unfortunate that happened. Believe it or not, this is the first time in 3 years that I've had a broken jar during all the canning that I do, and sometimes you just can't control these things. My assumption is that there was a hairline crack in the jar before it went into the pressure canner, and I hate to see that food wasted, but it happens sometimes, and we're just grateful for the 6 quarts that were left out of this batch that canned safely. And so here we have a tomato soup base that we can bulk up by adding more jars when we open it, or it can be a single serving of soup for my teenage boys when they come home hungry from school or work and want some lunch. You guys know that I spend a lot of time and energy preserving and canning food for my family. And one of the main motivators for doing that is so that I know everything that goes into those jars that fill my pantry shelves. When I can the food myself, I can ensure that no toxins and chemicals and other preservatives and things are going to end up in those jars that could harm my family. And that's one of the reasons I chose to partner with Birch Living last year to obtain mattresses for my children. Birch Living offers the healthiest mattresses out there for our children. They're free of flame retardants and a lot of the chemicals that could cause harm to our children's bodies. I became passionate about this many years ago when I switched over from allowing my children to wear flame retardant pajamas to wearing all cotton pajamas. I figured that if it's something that they're spending half of their lives in their bed sleeping, especially when they're children and they sleep for a really long time, I wanted to make sure that their bodies weren't covered in a lot of chemicals and they weren't sleeping on mattresses that could off-gas and produce these flame retardants and chemicals that could harm their developing bodies. Birch mattresses are made of natural wool, organic cotton, organic latex, and they're free from polyurethane foams. So I know that there's no off-gassing happening that could harm my children throughout the night while they're sleeping. Another thing that's really important to us here in our home, living without central air in a very humid state here in Ohio, especially this summer when it has been extremely hot and humid. Bedrooms are on the second floor of our home and can get very warm in the evenings. And what I love about the Birch mattresses for the children is that they help regulate their body temperature. Because they're made of the wool, it naturally helps regulate that and produces more airflow so they don't get as hot when they sleep. So they get a better night's sleep and they're not tossing and turning in the heat all night. Birch's children's mattresses specifically are certified safe and fiberglass free and are two-sided to offer age-appropriate comfort for a good night's sleep. Now, we can't ensure that everything our children come in contact with in the world is going to be non-toxic and perfectly healthy for their bodies, but two things that we can try really hard to prioritize are the food that they eat and the surface that they sleep on, because food is what nourishes and fuels their bodies, and the place that they sleep is where they spend almost half of their time every day. And we just want to make sure that it isn't adding to the toxic burden that's out there everywhere in the world. And so, you can't, like I said, you can't do everything, but as mattresses need replaced, I think one of the wisest things to do for your children is to make sure you're replacing it with something non-toxic, and that's why I'm grateful for Birch Living. So if you're looking at replacing some mattresses for your family and want to make them flame retardant free and 100% organic cotton, natural wool, and the other things that Birch Living offers, make sure you check out birchliving.com/3rivers and use my exclusive Labor Day partner offer. Get 27% off with the code BirchPartner27. And I want to thank them again for partnering with me to bring you this video. And with that said, let's go ahead and get back to some of the ways that we're preserving food for the family to make sure that it's full of healthy, non-toxic goodness that will nourish my family well through the winter. You're probably wondering why I do so many soup bases, and it's because it's my favorite thing to feed the children throughout the winter months when we're busy with homeschooling. It's the perfect lunch on a really busy day because I can whip it together very quickly. And split pea soup is one of those soups that they love in the winter, so we're going to work on a split pea soup base. I'm going to start by taking a couple fresh pork hocks, and we're going to get them in a big stock pot with water and have that simmering all day long to make a wonderful ham broth. And then later on in the day, once that broth is almost ready, I'm going to start getting my quart jars ready to can up my soup base. Once again, just like with the vegetable soup, we're following the National Center for Home Food Preservation guidelines. This gives us freedom in kind of creating our own recipes. The vegetables that I'm going to use today basically just include these onions right here, but you could add carrots, you could add potatoes, you could add beans, whatever you want in this soup base. I chose to cool down my hocks that I had used to make the broth and then take off any of the meat bits that were stuck to the bones and kind of divide that amongst these jars that are left. There won't be a ton of meat per jar, but it'll add some extra flavor and will be a great addition to our split pea soup when we want to make it later on. So what you need to ask yourself if you want to make this is, what do I like to have in my split pea soup? Do you like carrots? Do you like potatoes? Do you like meat? And just put them in the jars. As long as your jars aren't over half full with the meat, it's not going to change the recipe here. We like the flavor of bay leaves in our split pea soup. Of course, I'm going to add salt, so I'm doing a teaspoon of salt, and then I decided to add some garlic, but I was a little short on time, so I'm just going to use garlic powder instead of chopping up some of our fresh garlic. I just did a teaspoon of the garlic powder per jar. And then my broth was all ready, so I could start filling the jars, leaving an inch headspace. Remember to always debubble and then adjust the headspace accordingly after you debubble. So when I want to make some split pea soup, I will soak my split peas overnight. Sometimes I add lentils to my split pea soup as well. And then in the next morning, I'll pour one of these bases into the pot with the split peas when they're cooking. I could add extra broth if I wanted to, maybe another quart of just plain broth. And it has all the seasonings I need to get that soup simmering all day. It's so easy then. It can simmer while we are while we're working on our homeschool lessons. And then as soon as lessons are over, the soup is already done and ready without really much work on my part. So that's why I love to do this. It's for the convenience. Just like with the veggie soup, this is going to process for 75 minutes in the pressure canner. And then later on that evening, once the pressure canner had cooled down, this was all ready to head down to the pantry. This will make 7 lovely pots of split pea soup this winter. So many of the other projects that we did this week for the Every Bit Counts Challenge were duplicates. We're making things like pickled hot peppers, and we're making a lot of tomato sauce this time of year. And I didn't want to bring you the duplicates that would bore you because I just showed you how to do those things in the previous week's videos. But something that we did do this week is I harvested a bed of potatoes. Adam took all of the younger children, even Abby the baby, to the county fair for me on a Saturday morning, and I was able to get one bed of potatoes dug up before they ended up getting back home. I did some other work that day too, but I have 4 beds of potatoes. I got one of them harvested. It was super hot, and one was about all I could handle on that day. And so since I have 3 more beds in the garden, I'm going to save those beds for fresh eating, and those will go directly down into the cellar in the next couple of weeks when I decide to harvest those. And I decided to go ahead and do a preservation project with this one bed. So it's just 25% of my potatoes, but why not do something to add to my freezer to make really easy, convenient meals in the future? Because preserving food for me isn't just about preserving the nutrition. The preservation project helps me work ahead. It's like a meal prep for future meals and makes my life so much easier during the school year, because right now is growing homesteading season, but pretty soon, come September, we're going to switch into homeschool mode, and I'm not going to have the same amount of time to devote to meal prep and gardening and food preservation and things. So taking these potatoes and turning them into a convenient food for the future is going to make my future self so happy. It's going to make mornings really convenient. I decided that I'm going to turn these into hash browns, but you can't just chop up your hash browns and freeze them. There is a process that you have to use first to stop the enzyme action in the potatoes so that the texture is preserved and the nutrients don't degrade while they're sitting in the freezer. And that process is called blanching, and you want to do it for most vegetables that you're going to freeze. So let me give you a quick rundown of how that process works. So all we're going to do is chop up our potatoes into whatever size we like to have our hash browns. You could shred them, you can cube them, chop them however you would like. In the meantime, I have a pot of water boiling, a rather large pot, because we're going to put a lot of potatoes into it. And once we get it to boiling, we're going to end up needing to boil these small hash brown or chunks of potatoes for at least 3 minutes, somewhere between 3 and 5. I typically do about 3. And then immediately after they're done boiling, you're going to shock them with cold water. I end up just putting them in a colander and running them under ice cold water in the sink. And then after that, you'll let them dry and you can package them up. You can see I have the potatoes that I'm saving for fresh eating for the next couple meals. Here are my chopped up hash browns that I'm going to go ahead and put in the boiling water. And then, like I said, set your timer for 3 minutes. Once they're done boiling, shock them with your cold water. And then I like to pour them out onto a towel on my countertop to let them dry. You really want to make sure they aren't wet at all before you package them up. If you get all the extra moisture out, that's less ice buildup that you'll have on your potatoes, because any extra ice buildup will affect the texture of the potatoes in the future. So remember, this blanching process is necessary for the texture of the potatoes and to retain as much nutrition as possible, because if you don't blanch them, the enzymes in the potatoes will continue to degrade the nutrients over time, and really start to affect the quality of the end product. So after these sat on my towel for quite a while for the excess water to drain out of them and evaporate a little bit, I decided to start packaging them up. Now you could do this several ways. Since I have a vacuum sealer, I'm choosing to vacuum seal them. If you don't have a vacuum sealer, don't worry. You can just use a regular plastic freezer bag or any other kind of container that you want. If you are going to use just a regular Ziploc plastic bag, just make sure you get as much of the excess air out of it as possible before you seal it up, because that extra air could also affect the texture of these in the future. When I want to make hash browns, I will pull one of these packages out of the freezer and I can put them directly into the air fryer. I could deep fry them if I wanted to. I could fry them up on the stove with a little bit of bacon grease, and this will be so convenient on a winter morning when I want to cook a home cooked breakfast for the kids, but I don't have time to go down and chop potatoes maybe. This is just so much easier. So we got 4 packages. That's 4 little breakfasts that will help us out all winter long. One day this week, in lieu of a preservation project, I decided to go ahead and work on the fall garden a bit. I am planting a small fall garden, and on this day I planted some bunching onions, we did some radishes, and I did a small amount of peas. In a few weeks, I'll plant some more lettuce, and we'll do some extra greens like kale and things. I've already planted some broccoli. We already have a bed of carrots for the fall. So I don't do a huge fall garden because, like I said, once September hits, I am switching my mind into homeschool mom mode. More of my attention needs to be given to the children and their academics instead of focusing on homesteading projects. But I still want to have fresh food to eat through the fall, which will be lettuces and greens, radishes, carrots, things like that. And then anything that's left over, the carrots that we don't eat fresh, and things like that, can go down into the root cellar and will store without any work on my part throughout the rest of the winter. And those are some of my favorite foods to preserve are the ones that don't require extra effort on my part. And so the other beds of potatoes that I mentioned that I haven't harvested yet, those we will just cure and put downstairs and have those to enjoy for fresh eating. I was talking about that this week on my Instagram account, how as a homeschooling mom who also homestead, it is really difficult, especially as the children get older, to balance everything that needs to be done in a day. And how I do that is prioritizing different projects in different seasons. And so summer, it was all about growing as much food as we could and preserving as much as we could. But as things are changing and September creeps up, my focus needs to shift into the education of my children. And homesteading is still something that I really enjoy to do. I love growing food. I love cooking my food from scratch. I love preserving my food for convenient meals in the winter. But that can't be my priority. I have to switch over. And so we start back to school next Monday, which when this video comes out, it will be the Monday directly after the video comes out. And so I am slowly working on transitioning everything over. I'll still be doing some really easy food projects, but my content in the future months will be much less kitchen and garden focused and more on other things. More throughout the fall on convenient meals. I want to show you how I use the food that I preserve and how I use the food that I have fresh coming from the garden to make wonderful large family meals that are convenient and nutritious and efficient to cook when you're a really busy mother that has a lot to do, whether it's homeschooling or working or anything else. So I hope you are enjoying the Every Bit Counts challenge and that you have checked out the hashtag here on YouTube to see all of the other wonderful videos that content creators are putting out, and that you look at the account on Instagram that also is full of some amazing tips and tricks for food preservation. I'm so proud of this community that we have built. Everybody is just so wonderful to share their knowledge with everybody else. We will be back next week with another video, but before I go, I do want to thank again the sponsor of today's video, Birch Living. We're so grateful for your support, and thank you to everyone else who watches the video. You guys are a blessing to us. I hope that you have a wonderful week. We'll be back next week. Until then, friends, have a great one. Bye.